nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika.
Alice Kokensberger. I was in Tanzania. I arrived there in April of 1964. Stayed until I think I left in May of 1966. And so I arrived there by way of London and then Nairobi, and actually flew into Dar. And it was a very weird experience because my luggage was lost, and they told me at the airport that I wasn't on the list to come in, and they said you absolutely cannot enter the country.
You weren't even on the list to get off the plane?
No, to get, see, they'd only dealt in groups, and what happened was that Peace Corps of Washington had not told anyone in Dar es Salaam that I was coming. And they probably would have gotten around to it, but they didn't at the time. So it was, I'm pretty unflappable, and I just said, well, what do we do about this now? I'm supposed to be here.
You were talking to like the customs agent or
yes.
something?
Yes, and so he said, someone in the customs agency department knew someone that worked at the Peace Corps office in Dar. Luckily got in touch with her because this was a Sunday, and she happened to know where Dr. Chamberlain, the director, was dining that night, and got in touch with him, and so he came to the airport and got me. And I don't know who was more confused, Dr. Chamberlain or myself. So they put me in a hotel for a couple of days.
Now, he didn't know you were coming either?
No, nobody knew. Eventually, I guess it did arrive the day after I did. They sent a cable and said that I'd be arriving. I hadn't had any training for Tanzania, and I had wondered why, when we had wall switches, that they had, where you plug in, they had a switch. Well, I found out, I came in one night, and of course it was very hot in Dar, and I guess my palms were sweaty, and I went to turn on a table lamp and ended up on the floor, and didn't know where I was for a moment or two. My hand was all burned, and I had no idea where to go, who to talk to, and so, because here again, I think this was on a Sunday night. And so the next day, I found out where the Peace Corps doctor was, went to him, and he said, you're going to be okay, but it was 220 current. And he said, you're very fortunate that you let go of the lamp when you did.
Arthur Gordon. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanganyika. I had never taken one day of instruction how to teach, and there's 30 or so adults sitting in front of me. I think the oldest was maybe 55 or so. I'm not even sure he knew. At the end of the first 3 months, this elderly gentleman came up to me and said, you know, Mr. Gordon, when you first came into the class, I was so scared. And I had to laugh at that, because I was behind one of these tall science lab benches, you know, where they couldn't see my knees knocking. I was really scared, because I had no idea what I was doing. The Peace Corps does allow you to develop skills that you never knew you had. And one of the things that the Peace Corps taught me, that if you push yourself, you'd be surprised what you can do.
Bruno Koshlev. In Los Angeles, I was part of Tanganyika 4. Maybe it was at the end of my year of teaching, and they needed somebody to go up north to work with George Frame, and my name came up, and I was asked. I had a lot of contacts with the office in Dar es Salaam, and I knew the secretary there, and maybe she told me, this is coming up, they're looking for somebody, do you want to go? I have no idea, I don't remember how it came up, but I went up there and I was very pleased.
Now, were you in a house there, or mainly in a tent? Or?
No, we were strictly in a tent. We were in the field the entire time. We spent 4 months. I spent 4 months there, maybe 3.5, but it was 4 months, I think. We were always in the field. I never went back anywhere.
Any animal stories from there? Like, did you actually out near a rhinoceros at the time?
Yeah, we were near rhinoceroses often. We were constantly looking for them, and when we'd drive up as close to them as we could, which was maybe 300 or 400 yards, and we'd observe them with binoculars. Now, George was the scientist, and I was the designated driver.
You drove?
I drove. He had a Jeep. He had an American Jeep, and we drove. And we didn't have a Land Rover. We had no driver. We were on our own. I do remember one incident when, in fact, George and I really didn't have the same degree of interest in the work, and I tended really to find it rather boring to just sit there for hours and hours and hours waiting for a rhinoceros to move out of the way so we could collect his droppings. And George would, however, when it took time, get out of the Jeep and walk towards the rhino, very carefully, cautiously, to observe him more closely. And I was supposed to keep a very close lookout to make sure that if the rhino moved or had any gave any indication of being surprised by a human being walking toward him, I was supposed to immediately start the Jeep, gun it, and take off and pick up George. Well, I do remember one incident when, in fact, I really did kind of doze off, where I was reading my book, and George evidently found himself in a distressed situation, and when he came back, he was furious. And I said, well, George, I think something like, everybody's not perfect. But no, nothing. The rhino didn't charge, but he was moving towards George, and George definitely was alerted, and he wasn't very happy about it.
Glenn McMillan. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanganyika as part of Tanganyika 4. Okay, well, I was a sophomore in college. I was at Kansas State University in northern Kansas, and I was majoring in civil engineering. And I think, like many people my age, I had been in school my entire life, and was really getting anxious to go do something, even if it meant interrupting school. So I saw the recruiting posters, and I answered and applied. And I was, quite frankly, I was surprised that they took someone my age, because I was only a sophomore. And eventually, after I finished the Peace Corps, I had to go back and finish college. I had 3 more years of college after I finished the Peace Corps. They sent me a telegram, and you have to remember that I was a boy from a small place in Kansas, and telegrams were not part of my life. So the telegram impressed me. Eventually they sent me an airline ticket to go to the training, and I had never been on a plane. So I was a case of someone, really from the sticks. And I was only 19 when the recruiting was going on. And, it's very young, I think, for anybody to be leaving home and, going halfway across the country. So I'm still surprised in a way that they took someone that age. It still surprises me.
Walt Miller. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanzania as on a road project. Actually, outside of the country, I was in Dar es Salaam and met one of the Indian shopkeepers that had worked in Kahama and now was doing some work in Dar es Salaam. And he was actually running barrels of oil into Zambia because there was the oil embargo that was going on at that time. And we bumped into one another, and he asked me if I would be interested in going along with him on a trip. I said, yeah, sure, I'd like to do that. It was going to take a week, I believe. And I told him, I said, well, I just thought of something. I don't have my passport, He said, oh, don't worry about it. He said, we can get through okay. So we loaded up these trucks with oil, these big 55-gallon drums of oil. He had 2 trucks that he was taking down there, and we headed south, And
You were a passenger in one of these trucks?
yeah, and kind of an assistant driver.
But you drove it too?
I drove it too, yeah. And so we headed down to Zambia. We were headed for Ndola. And you know, we just basically drive all the time, stop in the middle of the road for a little rest, and then drive on. I'd see wrecked trucks along the way because they were making some pretty good money for delivering this oil. And we got down to the border, and they told us to park the truck in a certain location. And Zuli, who was the name of the Indian who was owned the trucks, the two trucks from Kahama, he decided he wasn't going to park the truck, that he wanted to drive straight through to Ndola and deliver the oil himself rather than have them apparently unload the oil and put on another truck. So we just kept going with the other truck behind us, and took it all the way to Ndola, and dropped it off and spent a little time sightseeing and shopping there, and picked up a couple of souvenirs. Then on the way back, one of the trucks stopped working, so we had to tow one of the trucks with us. They were empty at that time, so it was a little easier. When we got near the border with Tanzania, going back into Tanzania, Zuli said, "Well, you better drive now." You know, so I got in the driver's seat and drove up to the border, and he went in to do some paperwork that he had about coming back into the country. And the border guard came up to the driver's side and said, "You know, I want to see your passport." And I kind of gulped, you know. I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't have my passport. I left it at home in Tanzania." And he started challenging me. He said, "Well, you know, how do I know you're not from South Africa, that you're trying to sneak in the country?" You know, and then, and I was speaking to him in Swahili, and kind of making the argument that, you know, if I know Swahili this good, you know, do you think I'd really be from South Africa? You know, kind of like I must in Tanzania if I can speak it this well. And that's where I'm glad I really studied and worked on Swahili, because he finally did, you know, after sweating it out there, and I was sweating, he finally said, "Well, okay, I'm going to let you through this time, but next time you come through here, you be sure to have your passport." I said, "Oh, I will. You know, so finally Zuli came back, and he hopped in the truck, and we took off. And I said, "Boy, that was pretty tough. I'm glad glad you got back here so we could get out of that area." Because he could have, he probably could have put me in jail or something.
Nakupenda malaika, nami nifanyeje? Kijana mwenzio, nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika.